Good afternoon, students. I'm Dinela Omotuanaha, your history didactics tutor. The examination question papers, you are going to receive 3 question papers for 2021. Each question paper is out of 130 marks. Each question paper will be 2 hours, 30 minutes long. Each question paper will consist of 5 questions. You are expected to answer all the questions, and then for you to study and score marks, you must make use of your IOL study guide. What are you expected to know in the first place in the history didactics? You should know history as a subject. What are you expected to know here? You should know the meaning of history and the importance of studying history. This is more on general. Everyone I expect, and I know you have been, these are the things we expect the grade 8s to know. The meaning of history when they first enter into secondary level, and you also expect them to know, in most cases we also teach them to know the importance of studying history. As well as in our study guides, we know we have the importances of studying history. You should know them. My beloved and dear students, you do not need to memorize what history is. As a history teacher, you should know what history is. And you should already be able to know the importances or the reasons why we study history. In the second bullet there, we have history as an applied science rather than a basic science. Why is it history? Why do we consider history as an applied science than just a basic science? A basic science, applied science means you need to apply. It requires an application of knowledge than just a basic thing. So you should know the reasons why we regard history as an applied science than just a basic thing, a basic science. What are the aims of studying history? And dearest students, you should not confuse this with the importance of studying history. These are the aims. There are specific aims as to why you as a student, as to why you and your learners are striving to study history. And you should also know as well the tips on how to study history. There are certain techniques, there are certain ways of how a history student, how a history scholar go about, or how a student who is studying history approaches history. You don't just study history as you are studying mathematics. You don't just study history as you are studying agriculture. There are certain ways how to go about studying history, and that is what we expect you to know. You are also expected to know the usage of computer in history. There are various ways how a history teacher specifically make use of computer. For example, in lesson planning, do you only use computer for lesson planning? No. There are a lot of, that is just an example that I'm giving you, but there are a lot of usages. There are a lot of, things that a history teacher needs to make use of a computer. Perhaps you want to enter your learners' marks. That's not only it. Perhaps there are a lot of usages of computers in a history lesson. You should also know the lesson plan's components. In most cases, dearest students, I don't feel whenever I'm marking your assignments or whenever I'm marking your exam papers, I always get to a very much disappointment. You know, looking at a teacher, a history teacher, but does not know the components to include in a lesson plan. We as teachers, we expect learners. What is that you know, the basic components? You should know this. Just the things that you incorporate when you are planning your lessons. These are the basic components we need to know. And you know, these other things like how many minutes, those are the most important things, because what you are going to put there as in your lesson plan, it should be catered by the duration of your lesson plan. We also expected to know the differences between primary and secondary sources and how we can rely on these primary and secondary sources. Now the reliability to these secondary and primary sources, it depends on the knowledge of what you know about primary sources and secondary sources. You should know what are primary sources. You should know what are secondary sources. Because for you to rely on primary sources or for you to rely on secondary sources, it depends. You should first know what primary and secondary sources are all about. In the second unit, you should know the elements here, the elements of learning and teaching sessions. Here we are expected to know the aspects to be considered when using different teaching approaches to history. Remember, when we teach history, we use different methods. We use different approaches. Now, what are those aspects? What is that you need to know as a history teacher when you are teaching history? What are the thinking activities? The activities that you would incorporate, the activities that you would include in your history lesson plan that would stimulate thinking, that would stimulate learners' thinking capacities, that would make learners to be critical thinkers. So we should not confuse this with the thinking skills, but we should know what is that as a history teacher, what is that I would include in my lesson plan to incorporate, just to include in my history, in my history lesson plan, that would make learners think or become critical thinkers. We also need to know the thinking skills. What are the skills that learners acquire through studying history as far as thinking has to concern? So the thinking skills, we should not confuse them with the thinking activities. The activities are the one that we are going to make use, that we are going to include in our lesson plans. Thinking skills are the skills that we acquire now from the learners, that learners that would be acquiring throughout studying history. Let's move on to the teaching of multicultural learners. As we know, we are history teachers. Now, in our classrooms, we expect learners that are coming from different cultural backgrounds. You find out that for example, those teachers who are teaching in cities and towns, you teach learners that are Oshivambo speaking, Caprivians or from Zambezi region, Kavango, you can name them, Tamaranamas. Some of the learners are even from different countries. what is that now that you are going to incorporate as, what is that comes to your mind as a history teacher, so that you'll be able to deal with different learners because they are coming from different cultural backgrounds. Let me say you are also dealing with these whites. We have issues in history like, apartheid. And we know whites are the one who have, how are you going, because we deal with sensitive issues. What is that is coming to your mind as to how you are going to deal with these learners? Because remember, they are coming from multicultural backgrounds. What are the factors that are contributing to learning difficulties in history? What are the factors that are contributing to difficulties, in learning history? This one, it's factors that are contributing to learners finding it so difficult to study history. And the last thing here is the effective teaching strategies appeal to diversity of learning styles in history. Effective means productive. Effective means something that is going to be, that you are going to use the teaching strategies that is going to take place, the effective one, to diversities of learning styles for your history learners. Number 3 is the classroom management. You as a teacher, as a history teacher, you are the manager of your class. It has to do with how you are going to manage. But when you are managing the classroom, we look at the character of a teacher. We look at what is that you are displaying as a history teacher. Let's look at the keys to being a successful history teacher. What are the keys? What is that you have to portray, that you have to show if you want to become a successful history teacher one day? And we also look at the characteristics of a learner-centered history teacher. What do I mean by this? And my beloved students, I want to first emphasize on the learner-centered approach. Learner-centered is not a method, it's an approach to your teaching, to the way you deal with your teaching and learning. So, in most cases, we do not know what learner-centered approach is all about. Now, some of these group discussions, whatsoever, those are now, methods. Now, what are those characteristics of a history teacher that is mostly likely to incorporate learner-centered approach to his teaching or her teaching? Classroom punishments used to address inappropriate and unacceptable behaviors of learners. You as a history teacher, let me say, for example, a learner misbehaved in your class. What is that you are going to do as a punishment to these learners who are portraying, who are misbehaving, who are bringing these bad behaviors in your class? We talk of also corporal punishment in Namibian schools. What are your views, or what is the Namibian government saying about corporal punishment in Namibian schools? Is corporal punishment accepted in Namibian schools? And what are your views about corporal punishments? So if it's accepted or not accepted, what are the reasons why they do not want corporal, or why they want corporal punishment in Namibian schools? Find out whether it's accepted or not accepted in Namibian schools. And the last one here is how to praise and criticize learners' behavior. Let me give you a scenario. A certain learner in your class that you are teaching history you gave, for example, you have given a test to your kids. Now, some kids ended up passing this test and some did not pass this test. Or there are some learners in your class who are misbehaving, showing some bad manners, and some who are good behaving learners. Now, what is that to praise, to keep, these learners behaving good? And also, what is that you're going to do to those who are misbehaving? To praise, you do good to those who are doing good. You should also as well criticize those who are misbehaving so that they do not end up misbehaving always. So in that way, you are praising. When you are doing good to this who have done good, so in another word, to whatsoever behavior a learner is doing in your class, you should do something. Praise or criticize the good behavior, or to praise the good behavior or criticize the bad behavior. Number 4 is about assessment tools. You should know the importance of assessment. For you to be able to know the importance of assessment, you should know what assessment is all about. What is assessment? And what are those assessment tools? What is that the teacher used to assess the learners? Different types of assessment tools used in history. What are those assessment tools? For example, tests. For example, projects. For example, you can name them. You should also know different games, because through these games, that's how a history teacher, go about his lessons or her lessons. History, to many, they say it's a boring subject. But history is not a boring subject, because you can do different ways. You can come up with different approaches to it. There are different games. For example, a bingo game. You can come up with a lot of, these games. You can name them. And they make, this history an interesting subject, and I love history. Okay, what are the advantages and disadvantages of these history assessment tools? We have talked about these tools: tests, examinations, projects, etc. You can name them. Now, all these projects, tests, examinations, whatsoever, each of these has got disadvantages and advantages. So I do not know now what you should know, all the advantages, at least some advantages and some disadvantages to each of these history assessment tools. The word limitation there, it means disadvantages. If you come across with the word limitation in the test, in the examination, you should know that these are the disadvantages. For example, they can ask you, give the limitations to tests as one of the assessment tools in history. So you should know that the examiner is asking about the disadvantages of tests. Now, what are the general principles of answering the history didactics questions? The following should be considered when answering history didactics questions. You should answer all the questions to score marks. For you to score marks, remember, we have the marks that you have worked throughout in the assignment, and the marks that you are going to get in the examinations. Many a times students get good marks in the assignment, but ending up failing the examination just over a simple mistake that they do. You end up not answering all questions like you have asked. And remember, This is a teaching methodology, something that a history teacher is doing or is doing every day in your everyday teaching. So it requires you to give your general teaching experiences. For example, the components of a lesson plan. For example, the characteristics of being a successful history teacher. For example, you know how to deal with multicultural learners. These are the things that us history teachers or any other teachers is experiencing in your own teaching experiences. So you need also to give your general teaching experiences. So you will never be penalized by giving the general experiences. For example, corporal punishments. You as a teacher, do you practice corporal punishment, and why? As simple as such. This is the end of our presentations. Good luck.